Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more automation, the Car Company Tycoon game, continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1996. And the model we're going to be looking at in this video is the Satellite, which is our more affordable sports car. Now, one problem I have right off the bat with this model is the body I chose. And if I jump into the chassis, you can actually see the problem. So if I hover over any of the selections here, I get this text in red that says old body safety penalty. Well, unfortunately, out of the bodies that I have to choose from in 1996, only a few of them have the option to do the mid-transverse mounted engine, which we've been using for the Satellite all this time. And unfortunately, there are no newer bodies that use that mid-transverse mounting. So if I want to stick with that mid-transverse mounting, I have to use an older body and get a penalty. In any case, I have a monocoque chassis with corrosion-resistant steel, mid-transverse engine mount, as we already mentioned, McPherson strut in the front and rear. And this is chiefly to keep costs lower. As you can see, the comparison between McPherson strut and double wishbone. We're lowering down the production unit cost of this, as well as the weight, and we get more compactness, which is good with a smaller vehicle like the Satellite. Now, the panel material is corrosion-resistant steel, whereas before we were using plastic, but that's no longer available since I guess some update removed that. So that, as I said, is not an option. As far as styling, again, keeping things simple. We have some slats up here for some cooling. You do have to keep in mind this is a mid-mounted engine, so you have your intake air here, and we have some cooling slats on the top here. All right, so let's look at, as I said, we're going to have a transverse rear-wheel drive. Let's look at the engine. So this base model is going to use the same engine that's in the Star, but a performance upgrade of that engine. And it's going to produce 135 horsepower and 123 foot-pounds of torque. Moving into the trim selections, we have a manual gearbox, 5-speed. Now, the fifth gear is going a little bit beyond that estimated top speed, but not quite as much as we've had in previous models. So this is a much more aggressive gearbox setup. And as a result, we end up with 0 to 62 time of 8.7 seconds, which is still, a bit on the slow side. But we get a decent miles per gallon of 22.5. As far as the differential setup goes, I went with an open diff, as I felt like I didn't really need an upgrade to, for instance, a viscous LSD. Now, that would have helped with sportiness, as we can see here. It does upgrade sportiness a little bit, and it gives us some other benefits as well. But I didn't really need it to address wheel spin, although technically I could have set the gearbox up even more aggressively with it. I just wanted to keep, again, costs low, so we went with an open diff. As far as the tire setup goes, I went with medium compound road. Now, you could argue for sports compound road here, but this is a more affordable car that I don't think it's going to have as much in the way of those performance options, at least out the door. The consumer can always add on sports compound tires if they want. I just don't think that is necessarily the norm for this type of vehicle. But again, this is something you could argue for, and we would definitely benefit from that quite a bit, as you can see, although we do lose out on comfort and a couple other categories. And it probably would be a lot easier to push the gearbox setup harder as well and get a better 0 to 62 time. So again, that's a compromise I have made. I went with 15-inch rims, and I went with 175s in the front and 225s in the rear. Now, as far as the brakes go, I went with single piston brakes, both in the front and rear, solid disc. We have a little bit of brake fade. Now, one thing I noticed with some of the models I was doing is an upgrade to the 2-piston actually was not beneficial to me, although, yeah, so you can see the stopping distance is actually worse rather than better, which I found that kind of interesting. It's not saying that the brake fade is necessarily worse, although I would have expected it to be worse. But we are having a worse overall performance. So I found that a little bit interesting. I would have expected better braking performance with the two piston setup, but that's not what I'm seeing. And I think we'll see that in a little bit more detail once we get into the turbocharged variants, where I did end up going with the two piston brakes, even though they were not really beneficial at the time that I set up the vehicle. In any case, as far as aerodynamics go, I went with fully clad under tray, and the cooling airflow is only roughly 10 over what we need. Now, I do have a wing in the back. I don't know if you saw it when I was showing the vehicle, but it's right back here. So I did give myself a little bit of downforce with the wing angle in the rear, which we can see here. Moving on to the interior setup, 2 seats, the only choice. Standard interior, standard cassette, and standard safety with power steering and ABS as standard. As far as the suspension goes, we have standard, gas monotube, and passive. And this is the setup that I went with. And let's go ahead and jump into the test track here. Load up the airfield track and get our time. But of course, first, let's mention top speed. We have 130.4 miles an hour. We're a little under 2,500 pounds. And we already saw the 0 to 62 time. So let's go ahead and get our overall time. And we ended up with 1 minute 35.05. So let's go ahead and jump into our other version of the 2-liter engine-powered satellite, which is an automatic. And that's going to be the main difference with this trim. So we have a 4-speed automatic, dramatically worse 0 to 62 time. I tried my best to get that 0 to 62 time down, but it's just one of those things that you see with automatic transmissions a lot more. And I don't remember this being as big of a penalty in the past as it has been now. That is a really dramatic difference, especially considering how much more aggressively I set up the gearbox with the automatic rather than the manual. And I do have wheel spin to go along with how aggressively I set up the gearbox, but still, the end result is a 0 to 62 time of 9.9 seconds. So we're going to expect a lot slower time. And also, because of that more aggressive gearbox setup, we have dramatically worse fuel economy of 20.9 miles per gallon. Now, I expect an automatic to get worse fuel economy than a manual, but again, we have pretty dramatic differences between the two. All right, moving along, tire setup is going to be exactly the same as it was before, as is the brake setup, the aerodynamics, interior, suspension might be slightly different, but I don't think it's all that different. And let's jump into the test track. So as a result of the way I set up the gearbox, we did lose a bit on top speed, 128.1 miles an hour. I think we're down a bit on weight, although not 100% on that. And let's go ahead and just see the time. So definite worse time here. So we lost more than 2.5 seconds over the manual transmission. And I was saying that the weight was down. I don't think that is true. I just want to jump into the manual transmission version really quickly here so that we can see the difference. Yeah, I was mistaken. It is heavier. I thought they made that change. Okay, let's jump into the turbocharged versions. And first start with the engine, actually. So now we have a turbocharged engine. This is a 1.6-liter inline-4 engine that's producing 175 horsepower and 149 foot-pounds of torque. Now, because of the way that the power comes in, we're going to have quite a bit of a reduction in drivability. And this is just the kind of wavy line you get with a turbocharged engine because you have turbo lag. And as a result, we get quite a bit of a penalty. But this is still a 5-speed manual. I have no wheel spin, and we have a 0 to 62 time of 7.5 seconds. So definitely quite a bit quicker. And miles per gallon wise, 21.1 is not bad. It's actually better than the automatic, the 2-liter automatic. So not too bad. I did upgrade to a viscous LSD with this trim though, as this is a little bit more of an upgrade over, well, quite a bit of an upgrade over the 2-liter naturally aspirated engine. And again, we have an upgrade here. So medium compound road for the standard trim with the naturally aspirated engine, but this being a little bit more of a performance build. We have sports compound road tires here. And the brakes, as I mentioned, I switched to 2-piston, both in the front and rear. And I went with the vented disc in the rear. As you see, solid disc, we have some brake fade. Although we do lose a little bit of stopping distance with this switch. Now, I did mention switching from 2-piston to 1-piston was not really that big of a benefit. As you can see here, our stats are actually much better with the 1-piston brake in the rear, which I really honestly don't understand that. We have better overall braking distance, and stats are dramatically better. I mean, we gain 0.6 in sportiness and 0.7 in drivability. And we see a similar thing with the front brakes. Oh, okay, maybe not the front brakes. But you get my point, though. You would think that switching to 2-piston brakes would actually make your stopping distance better and your overall stats better. But that's not the case. And that's just a weird thing that I noticed with this model, and maybe a couple other models that I made when doing this year period. As far as the aerodynamics goes, now we're going to have a little bit more required cooling air than we did before. And again, I went with roughly 10 over. And I went with the same wing angle as I did with the standard trim. I didn't really change that at all. We still have the same wing, so I didn't really change that. Okay, moving on to the interior. Nothing's really changed here either. This is more a performance upgrade, not a upgrade in the interior. And then also, this is the suspension setup, which is going to be similar to the previous suspension setup, but maybe just set up a little bit different because of differences in weight. In any case, let's go to our test track and see our stats here. So we have 138.9 miles an hour for our top speed. We're a little bit heavier here. Now, this is a smaller displacement engine, but the 2-liter engine was an aluminum block. I believe this is cast iron. I could double check on that. Yeah, we have cast iron. So that's one issue as far as weight. But also we have the turbocharger on there with an intercooler that is also going to weigh us down some as well. So we are heavier. We already saw the 0 to 62 time, and I'm noticing that the cornering Gs are a little bit better as well. So let's go ahead and run the time. I think we can expect this is going to be quicker. So we've got 131.13 versus the 135.05 that we saw with the other manual trim with the naturally aspirated engine. All right, so we have one more trim to look at, and this is the automatic of the turbo. Now, I thought about not including an automatic of the turbocharged variant, but I figured we might as well allow for those that want to be wusses and not use a manual transmission in a performance car. But again, we have a 4-speed automatic, and again, we went with a more aggressive setup. But still, we end up with a reduced 0 to 62 time of 8.3. Although we are a little bit better in drivability than we were before, but that's, changes due to automatic transmission for sure. The tire setup is going to be the same as the other turbocharged trim, as is the brake setup, as is the aerodynamics, the interior, the suspension, and finally, let's take a look at our test track here. So we've got 137 miles an hour. And cornering Gs looks about roughly the same. I haven't really been paying attention to the weight distribution of the different models, but we can see quite a bit rear heavy. Let's go ahead and run our time, though. Now, what I'd like to see is a faster track time than the naturally aspirated engine with the manual transmission. Let's see if we did that. So we definitely did. 1 minute 33.53 But again, we have close to a 2.5-second penalty from the manual transmission to the automatic transmission. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the standard trim here and look at the market setup and factory setup of the vehicle. So first we have the project team, and I went with a 50 setup for the Focus. I figure with the inclusion of turbochargers that there is some tech involved here, so we're going to be focusing a little bit more on that tech. And we see the same kind of setup with the engine. As far as the factory goes, we have a large factory. We're producing 635 cars a day. Now, honestly, I haven't really been thinking about production a day and how realistic those numbers are. I've just more or less been setting things up. Just what's felt right with, without having to do that further research. In any case, we have 75 for the automation, and we are only using 2 shifts. And the way I allotted the construction, I figured that the automatic trims would not be as popular as manual transmission trims, this being a performance-oriented vehicle. But I figured, there's still going to be sales there. And I also figured that there would be more sales in the naturally aspirated engine because of its affordability. So we see those production numbers. Although I figured that the turbocharged manual transmission would get more sales than the standard naturally aspirated automatic. Again, it would be nice when the actual career mode is implemented, that if we had some kind of projection of what kind of sales we would have to actually base our opinions on. But, sometimes you just have to throw things at a dartboard and figure it out. So as far as the engine production went, I set it up for to meet the numbers that we got as far as production of cars. So I believe this is the naturally aspirated engine, which I am incorrect in that. Did I do my math correctly? I believe I set that up incorrectly. This should be the naturally aspirated engine, and I think I got it backwards. Yeah, I got my production backwards, I believe. Well, actually, let me add up the turbo. No, that's correct. I apologize. Yeah, that is correct. I'm second-guessing myself, and wrongly. In any case, the production I went with, again, automation 75. I used 2.5 shifts. This is a medium factory, though, as I felt like we didn't really need a large factory for this production. And we're producing 231 engines a day, which matches our demand for our turbocharged engines. And then I'm using a large factory to produce the naturally aspirated engines, and I'm producing a little over 400 of those. All right, let's go into the market data. So we have a 5% markup with all of the models here. And as we can see, even with the standard naturally aspirated engine, this is quite a pricey vehicle when you think back to the Asteroid. And the fact that was a little over $11,000 for the base trim of the Asteroid. Yeah, I honestly think this needs tweaking. The fact that the equivalent of a Toyota MR2 would cost more than a pickup truck is very silly. But that's the way it is in the game at the moment. In any case, the 3 markets that we're hitting is Fun Premium, Sports Budget, and Pony. It seems like we always hit the Pony card, regardless of what we build. It's always going to be Pony. Even when we have a front-wheel drive car, it is a Pony, hitting the Pony segment. But Sports Budget is definitely a market segment that we're looking for. We'd also be looking for Sports Car, but we didn't do very well on that market. Light sports, we did not too bad in, and I think this is another category that we're definitely looking for. A more agility-based build. So we did do decently here, and we also did light sports budget, but affordability is a real issue with these categories. For instance, sports budget, we're only 49.4%, and light sports budget, we're at less than 30%. Again, that's another thing that I think needs addressed. These affordability numbers seem awful ridiculous at times as well. I mean, this is supposed to be a budget-oriented vehicle. I set it up for that, and yet still, we're so far off the affordability number here. Like, what would you need to hit this light sports budget? A vehicle that costs $6,000? Again, is that realistic for the mid-90s? I don't know about that. In any case, let's go ahead and jump into our automatic trim and see how this is different. So we have family sport. I think that's a nice category to hit. We're keeping that sports budget, and now we're all the way over to premium budget. Not really a category we're looking for, but we're still not doing too bad in light sports and light sports budget, but we're definitely down because of the differences between a manual transmission and an automatic transmission. Let's finally jump into the turbo trims. I expect this to be even more expensive. Oddly enough, it's not. It's dramatically less expensive. There has to be some kind of bug here. Really, honestly, the fact that a turbocharged engined car with more options selected costs less than a naturally aspirated engine with less options. Yeah, this is totally bugged, clearly. 11,130 versus 14,500. So apparently I was incorrect in which model I should be producing more of, considering that this is so affordable. In any case, moving along, we're still doing very well in the pony segment and the light sports budget and track budget. We're also doing pretty well in, and I think a lot of that has to do with how much we've dropped the price. We're now not nearly as bad in the affordability numbers. We're also doing well in light sports, track, and sports budget. So dramatic improvements, both because of performance, but also because of a massive reduction in price, which I really didn't expect. When I do these builds, I oftentimes do not really do a lot of the comparison until I make this video. And I'm finding this incredibly surprising. In any case, with the automatic version of the turbocharged engine, we have still the pony segment, sports budget, and now the premium budget that we hit with the other automatic transmission version of this model. But we're still doing pretty well in some of the other segments we saw before. All right, let's go ahead and exit out and look at our comparison and scratch our head at why the turbocharged version is so much more affordable than the naturally aspirated version. So if we hop into the sandbox here, and we open up some of the other models that we have so far, and this is starting to get, pretty long here, our list, as we have a lot of models unlocked. But let's mostly just focus on the satellite and its comparison with itself. Then maybe do a little bit of comparison with the Constellation, which is going to be the most sporty of the trims that we have outside of the satellite here. So, first off, let's just jump into why is the naturally aspirated version more expensive. Well, let's look at the costs here. As far as what we're seeing here, material cost and production unit cost, this should be cheaper. If we see the two naturally aspirated versions versus the two turbocharged versions, and the production time of the naturally aspirated versions versus the turbocharged versions, both of these are less. And yet, when we got into the market share, this cost dramatically more than this. By $3,500, close enough to that. So that part of the game is clearly massively bugged and definitely needs addressed. But in any case, let's go ahead and just do our comparison here. So as far as drivability goes, we're for the most part above 40 minus the one turbocharged trim here with the manual transmission. And that trim, I believe, is the worst performer as far as drivability goes. And I believe this is probably, you could argue, one of the worst performers overall. It comes close to the Luna. The Luna has 42 and 45, and I think if we compare apples to apples, we have 42 and 45. So, I think comparable to the Luna, I would say. but our turbocharged versions are definitely on the low end of the scale. Now, as far as sportiness goes, this is one of our better performers. Our worst performing out of the satellite is matching the best performing of the Constellation, which is the next best. But our manual transmission versions are definitely doing a ton better, which I think we expect. I don't know if I expected that much of an increase. Like, let's see. Normally we get about a 7 point here. With the star, we've got... Yeah, okay, so we're seeing similar gains here, so I guess it's not too far outside the norm. But we have a 10-point gain from the automatic transmission to the manual transmission with the turbocharged version. Moving on, as far as comfort goes, definitely it's going to be under the Constellation. I would say, for the most part, better than the Asteroid. Better than the Luna. Not quite as good as the Nebula, but I kind of expect that. Maybe comparable to the Star, but not too bad comfort-wise. Prestige-wise, I would say this is probably on the lower end. I mean, it's not going to match what we have with the Constellation, and it does exceed probably some of our other models in some regards. It's not too bad of a performer. And safety, outside of the Asteroid, this is probably one of the worst performers as well. Luna is comparable. So I don't think that's too surprising, though. This is a pretty small and lightweight vehicle. Practicality, not too high. Again, it looks like the worst out of the bunch, which is not too surprising. Off-road is pretty terrible. Again, not too surprising. I think the Luna is the only one that does the worst in that regard. Actually, it does a little bit better than the Star, so I guess it's not too bad. Utility is pretty far down there too, but not too far off of, again, the Luna and the Star. And then we have reliability, which most of our models are not too bad here, and I would say this is comparable to, for instance, the Star down here, so not too bad. Fuel economy, I would say, is probably on the low end considering the size of the vehicle. But again, not too bad. We also have to take into account, I forgot to mention, the safety penalty that we're getting here due to that older body. I'm wondering if the older body has some other effects. I may jump into the model here just to see if we still have that market share penalty that I was not a big fan of from the past. As far as weight goes, this is one of the lighter vehicles we have. It's actually close to the Luna as far as light and the Star in some regards, so not too far off of that. It's a lighter vehicle for sure. Let's just hop into one of these trims here real quick, because I just want to check, are we still getting a market share penalty? The body is too old to be desirable. Desirability reduced by 6%. So keep that in mind as well with the desirability numbers that we have here, that we have a penalty because of the older body, which, again, I'm not that big of a fan of, especially if you're trying to build certain types of cars. Like, for instance, if you were trying to recreate a 911, there's only so many rear-engined bodies you have a choice of. So there's going to be certain year period stretches where you get massive penalties for trying to build that model throughout the year. So I'm not that big of a fan of this. I kind of get the safety penalty, but I'm really not a big fan of this. I can see why they're doing it, but I'm not so sure I agree with it necessarily. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.